welcome you all to Trek Wars. So today in Trek Wars, we are going to be discussing the Cardassians. We're going to be discussing the ships the Cardassians were fielding during the beginning stages of the Cardassian Federation border war. And we'll talk about some of the ships, we'll talk about some of the reasons their ships are the way they are, we'll talk about some of the cultural ramifications of the behavior of the Cardassians that influence their ship designs. So, first off, we need to understand that the Cardassians are a pretty standard race when it comes to technology. The Cardassians did misuse their planetary resources, which led to massive starvation, and many of the planetary governments had collapsed. Eventually, they will come together and they'll form one standard Cardassian government, which we all know is the Cardassian Central Command. So the Cardassian Central Command becomes one of the focal points of the Cardassian government. The Cardassian themselves refer to themselves as the Cardassian Union. So at this point, the Cardassians are desperate for resources, their people are starving, and they decide to move to the stars. So the first mass-produced cruiser that they created is the Netaroke. A 2260 had 8 phaser emitters and 5 photon torpedo launchers. Now, this ship is in similar stats to the Federation Constitution class starships. This ship is incredibly expensive to produce during this time period, mostly because of its expensive torpedo armaments. The ship's shields are around 173, they're suboptimal, and its hull value is extremely good at 617,500, meaning that this ship's hull is twice that of a standard Federation starship. Now, this ship's primary role is to engage planetary defenses, bombard planets, and bring large numbers of troops to take over other worlds. Once they've destroyed the defenses of these minor races or any planet or planetary target, they will then build a space station which will be used to start mining all the resources of the conquered planet and people. So the Netaroke, during its time period, was considered a heavy cruiser. It's very similar to the Federation Constitution class. Now, this ship is very well armed, especially for a ship of its time period carrying so many photon torpedo launchers. Now, its shields are suboptimal. Its armor is twice that of a Constitution class starship, so its overall stats are very similar but slightly less than a standard Constitution class starship. Now, this ship would be very expensive to produce. It's very well armored, it's heavy, and the ship is absolutely bristling with torpedo launchers. So torpedo launchers are very expensive, and antimatter was something that was of a rarity for the Cardassians, but because of out of desperation and necessity, these very expensive starships were created in large numbers. They used these starships to conquer other planets in order to pay for this military. So now let's talk about the ships itself and the fleet. These ships are not maneuverable. These ships are very slow at warp speeds. These ships would not be very efficient at protecting your border. And the reason for that is, yes, at warp speed, torpedoes are the best weapon to, attack. But because their warp speed is slow, most ships can just avoid them. These ships are slow-moving tanks. They're really good for attacking planetary or structures or stationary objects or extremely large starships that are slow and unmaneuverable like itself. Now, this ship does have a decent amount of secondary weapons. 8 emitters is pretty good, but these ships would fall victim to faster patrol ships. These ships are pretty much designed for one purpose and one purpose only. Now, these ships did survive all the way up into the border wars, but they were used as a backup ship because by that time they're relatively small and they do have a good punch and they do hit relatively hard. But like I said, these ships were never decommissioned because they were so expensive. They kept them. So we look at the Cardassian army as a whole. You can see this ship is located about in the middle, and you can see that its weaponry is very high. So it's carrying more firepower than most Cardassian ships, even newer Cardassian ships. And that's only because of its firepower coming from its photon torpedoes. Its other weapons are suboptimal. So this ship is a long-range torpedo frigate by the time of the Border Wars. It's no longer a frontline starship. It's dedicated strictly to support only. So 385,000 in attack potential is extremely powerful. That is a lot of weaponry for a starship of its size. So when this ship was originally designed as the first major Cardassian ship, it was doing all its jobs. The Cardassians did start to realize that this ship is relatively slow and its border patrol duties wasn't as efficient as what they wanted, so they started to build new designs to fix those roles. So by the 2270s, the Kulanor was a new designed warship. It was bigger, it was faster, it was more modern, and it was cheaper than the Netherrock. So the Netherrock was a very expensive, high-performance, long-range support vehicle by this point. So the Kulanor took its place and became the primary warship of the Cardassian Union. Now, the reason why the Kulanor is taking its place of the previous generation is, one, the ship is cheaper and it's actually stronger. So it's benefiting from better targeting systems, newer technology, but most of all, its mid and close range tactical abilities are far superior than the previous generation warships. They're now using spiral wave disruptor technology, and also the ship is using a very cheap photon torpedo tube, which is only a portion of the strength of the previous one. It's slightly weaker. It's losing about 25,000 megatons of damage. So you're getting a cheaper photon torpedo and this is all for cost, because the Cardassians had acquired a lot of space by this point, and they needed to be able to protect that space. And so they needed something that was faster, more maneuverable, and could be produced at a cheaper level than the previous generation warships. And that's where this came into play. Alright, so we'll take a look at the Kulanor. The Kulanor is also the first ship to acquire that standard Cardassian design, which we'll see in the future. The shields are 173 to save its previous ship, 793,800 for the hull, meaning the hull is slightly stronger. Its defense value is 966,800, slightly better than the previous ship. Now, its overall attack power is only 99,968. We know that the previous ship is almost 3 times this, and that's because of the torpedoes. Like I said, this ship is more of a budgetary starship to be built en masse. So there were a lot of these ships built, and their primary role was to defend from other capital ships. So this is more of a mass-produced capital class close-range attack ship. And because it had such powerful spiral wave disruptor secondary weapons, so those spiral wave disruptors are very powerful weapons during this time period, and so this ship would be more than capable of being able to take on annoying raiders or any kind of fast patrol ships. This ship would make short work of them. This ship had basically everything it needed to be a top-of-the-line warship of this time period. So next we're going to talk about the Narok scout ship. So the Narok scout ship is more than a scout ship. It was used for scouting, it was used for reconnaissance, but its primary role was for engaging targets that are attacking the borders. So before the border wars took place with the Federation, when the Cardassians were expanding, those larger starships were protecting more valuable assets. Those colonies that are not worth a full cruiser to be there, this is where these scout ships would come into play. Now, the other thing about these scout ships is they are surprisingly well armed. So they carry 2 spiral wave disruptors as well as 2 photon torpedo tubes. Now, a scout ship carrying 2 photon torpedo tubes is a lot. So that means that this ship is actually supposed to be engaging ships at high warp. So this is an anti-piracy starship. So this ship is going to attack pirate ships. It's going to get them in warp speed where the other ships are too slow and can't catch them. This ship can, and it has the firepower to bring them down. Now, this ship is not going to be very efficient against, obviously, full-on cruisers, but for piracy and things of that nature, this ship is well equipped for its duty. So when the ship came out, it was really good. As time went on, and especially during the Cardassians' issues with antimatter, so if you guys know the history of the Cardassians, antimatter became something that was hard to come by in Cardassian space, and so antimatter became very expensive. So small ships like this, there was no reason to build ships like this anymore, because these ships' efficiency was only based on the fact that they were carrying, antimatter warheads, which are photon torpedoes. But when you don't have the torpedoes to spare, there's no reason that you're going to put them in these small ships and risk wasting these expensive weapons when they're going into your larger ships. So this ship did fall out of favor. It still is around during the beginning parts of the border wars, but a lot of these ships were decommissioned. Their torpedo launchers, their torpedoes were removed, and they're put into newer generation ships. So the reason for this, if you know the history about Cardassians have a huge shortage of antimatter. So they're very hard for Cardassians to build torpedoes because that resource is very limited in their sector of space. And for a long time, the Cardassians were separated and they kept themselves, they weren't trading and they weren't working with the other races. That didn't come until much later. So next we're going to look at a newer generation starship. So this ship is of a newer line, and this is the Vassad. So the Vassad is a long-range deep space explorer, which is part of the Cardassian main fleet, but this ship operates as a support vessel. So its primary function is to be a support vessel. And how it is a support vessel is this ship is built with very powerful jamming technology. So this ship will focus its jamming technology onto enemy vessels, making it harder for them to lock onto the Cardassian ships. The ship specializes in jamming technology, and it's newer and it's well armed. Alright, so let's go ahead and let's take a moment. Let's look at the different weapons it has. So it has 4 CD6s, and it has 3 CD5s, and it has 1 SD6, and it has 1 torpedo launcher. So the ship is obviously not engaging at long range. It's not its primary goal. It's got quite a few weapons for close range, and then it's got that standard, heavy spiral wave disruptor cannon. So this ship has got newer generation weapons. It's going to be good at medium to short range. So this ship is a newer generation ship, and you can see that by the increased attack power, over 108,000. Shields are 2,300, 104. So you can see that these shields are getting closer to what we'll see in the future with the Galore. The hull value is around the same as the other ships, 852,600. So this means this ship is a decent sized ship. It's in that larger category compared to some of the other ships that we were previously looking at. It's a support vessel. So I want to talk about what it would do in a supporting role with the fleet. So we get an idea of what the Cardassian fleets are going to look like. So you can see that the Netarok are going to be the rear support torpedo frigates. The Vassad is obviously going to jam the enemy. It's going to bring additional support, and it's going to be used probably to protect the Netarok. Now, the Kulanors are going to be the front-end warships, and then the Nurok scouts are going to be used as support auxiliary craft. So they're going to use torpedoes for long range, and then use their spiral wave disruptors at close range to, screen enemies and give them additional targets. So that's the kind of composition that you're going to see with the Cardassians. All right, so later on, after the Galore is put into full service, there were enough of these ships where they started regulating them to different duties. There were some that were modified to have lance phasers in the front of the ship, which they basically removed the Spirewave disruptor cannon and replaced it with the lance phaser. There are other variants that are the same ship stats that we've already seen, but instead they are using some additional tractor beams, and they're carrying cargo equipment with the front pinchers. So there are different variants of this ship, but its intended role is to jam the sensors of other ships. Okay, so the Vassad is around 2283, so it's newer than all the previous ships. This is a newer generation ship. You can definitely see that it's a mid-range attack vessel. It's got that support abilities. So this ship is when they start developing technology that's going to go into the Galore. This is a predecessor of the Galore. So it won't be too much longer when we'll start seeing the Galores enter the field. But these ships are pretty decent. I mean, overall, 108. It's more firepower than some of the other ships that we were seeing out there. Its shields are getting into that more modern shielding, and its hull is good. It's not as great as some of the other ships, but it's in that acceptable range. You know, it's better than what you're seeing on the Netarok, you know, which is only 617, so it's a few hundred points higher as far as armor. It's also quite a bit bigger. It's in that, I believe it's the 1200 range, if I remember correctly. Yeah, 1200. Yeah, so it's almost 1300. So it's 1293,444. Its armor reading looks like it's 0.6. So its armor is good. Overall, this ship is a fantastic ship for the time period. It was a well-armored ship. Its shields were not that great, but for Cardassians, they were state-of-the-art. All right, so now we're going to look at a newer ship. This ship is the Saratan class. So the Saratan class is pretty much the same ship that we just looked at, except for we've removed some of the specialized technology, expensive technology, the jamming technology, and we've created basically the same stats, slightly better shielding, slightly more firepower, but the main reason this ship was created is it's a frigate. It was created in 2289, only a few years after the previous ship. This ship's torpedoes are suboptimal. Its weapons are good for its time period. This ship is designed to harass larger ships and use its mobility to its advantage. The ship is designed to attack larger targets. So when you go and you look at the stats here, like I said, they're very similar. So the Vassad is a pretty expensive ship because of that jamming technology. We wanted something that's just pure offensive and cheaper. And so a few years later, they came up with the Saratan. So the Saratan has slightly better. It's got like 20,000 points better in offensive capabilities. Its shielding is only slightly better. So you go from 2,300 or 231,000 to 259,000. Hull value is only slightly less than the previous ship. So overall, the ship are pretty much identical, honestly. The only difference is this ship has got a lot more maneuverability and it is cheaper. So there's really two roles for this thing. It's going to be supporting the cruisers, and it's also going to be in the back line. They're quick enough and fast enough that they're going to be able to defend those key ships. So your sensor ships, your long-range torpedo frigates. So these ships are strong enough and fast enough that they can fight off anything that gets past the cruisers and tries to attack those high-profile targets. These ships are quick. The best way to think of them is they're the Cardassians' version of birds of prey. All right, so the final ship we were looking at is the Heavy Class Natal Cruiser of 2329. So this ship was designed after the Galore. So about 20 years after the Galore came into service, we're seeing this ship. And honestly, this ship caught me off guard because I, in my mind, had pictured this ship as being a small, like, destroyer. But in actuality, it's nothing like that. Alright, so in actuality, the Natal would be something that a commander would want. So this ship is definitely the ship that commanders are going to be using of large fleets. So you look at all the different Cardassian ships we have, this ship by far is the strongest ship that we're seeing so far. So you can look at its stats and you can see how amazing it is. Alright, so right off the bat, the ship is in the 300 range as far as meters, so it's as big as most of the ships that we've seen on this list. It's carrying a CD-6B and has 5 of them, and this is the part that really surprised me, is it has 4 CSD-4s. So that means that this thing has 4 spirewave disruptor cannons. Remember, Galore carries 1 or 2 at max, and it also has modern torpedoes. So this ship has got 2 good torpedo launchers. It's got 4 phenomenal spirewave disruptors, and then it has 5 more additional good spirewave disruptors. So this ship's maneuverable, it's well armed, it's capable of taking on pretty much anything else out there it runs into. It's a good all-around ship. Alright, so the ship's pretty big. It's 303 meters, has an attack value of 172,905. Its shields is what's really interesting, 433,320. So Galores are 260,000, and that's like the standard that we pretty much see with the Type 1 and stuff. So this has got twice the shields of a standard Galore. Its hull value is 1,234,800, which is really high. So this is in the same category as the Galores, because you know the Galores have a lot of armor. So this ship has got a lot of armor because the full defense of 1,644,984. So what is the role of this ship, in my opinion? This ship is going to be in the front lines. It's going to be a command ship. If you need to really push an attack, this is the ship that you're going to use. Now, honestly, I don't think the Cardassians have that many of these ships, because with these stats, they must be enormously expensive. So I think that this ship is probably guarding key structures and is probably like a command ship in a small fleet. So there are probably a decent amount of these ships, but they're nowhere in numbers as the previous ships. And the reason I would speculate that is based on these stats. This thing has got to be ridiculously expensive. So the ship is not as big as a Galore. Its shields are superior. It's got more firepower. This is a command ship. Anyone who's using this ship, this is at this point in time, this is the best the Cardassians are producing. So the Cardassians, when this ship came out, this has got to be the state-of-the-art, best of the best. So it's 20 years after the Galore had come out, became the mainstream mass production warship. They needed something that get a little more oomph, and then this is what they got. So comparing this to Federation starships, it still doesn't compare to Federation starships. It's still falling behind, but this is still a good ship. So this ship could go toe-to-toe with a lot of the older generation Federation starships and come on top. So to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, so this ship could probably go toe-to-toe with an Excelsior. We could go either or. Some of the newer Federation starships, some of those Deep Space Explorers, some of those Golden Era starships using Type 9 phaser arrays. These ships could probably take those on. It would be, like I said, it's our hit or miss. This is a strong ship. This would probably be one of the stronger ships that you would see during the Cardassian border war. So a large Cardassian invasion fleet would look something like this. You're going to have those scout ships, you're going to have your cruisers, you're going to have your newer generation quick assault vessels, your destroyers basically, guarding those back line starships. So you're going to have your sensor jammers, your long-range torpedo frigates. Those things are going to be in the back, and they're going to be protected by those mid-range starships. So this is kind of like what you would see with a big invasion. Now let's look at a more common fleet. Alright, so a more realistic fleet is you're probably going to have 2 cruisers, and you're probably going to have 3 scouts, and then you're going to have 3 raiders that are going to be in the back line defending your long-range torpedo ship, which is going to be used for bombarding targets or long-range stations and things of that nature. And I think it would be good to have at least 1 sensor jammer. So you're going to have 1 cruiser in there that's got sensor jamming technology, to help limit the amount of torpedo damage received from the Federation's superiority when it comes to long-range artillery fire. So this is probably a more realistic Cardassian fleet in my opinion. And though the Cardassians are an interesting race, there is one thought that has been bothering me this entire time looking at the stats of these ships compared to what Federation ships have. How is it that the Obsidian Order did not know how powerful the Federation is? So the more I thought about this, the more it bothered me until I started thinking about this. The Obsidian Order works for itself. And it has, in the future, we'll see that it's willing to make Cardassia go to war with the Dominion to benefit itself. I speculate that the Obsidian Order knew the entire time that the Cardassians were ill-equipped to deal with the Federation. I think that the Obsidian Order pushed the Cardassian people into war with the Federation, knowing that the Federation really wouldn't retaliate, and that they could probably convince them to give over territory in order to, have peace. And they would never really take the Cardassians that serious. I think that the Obsidian Order actually tricked the Cardassian Union into going to war with the Federation, and they planned it all out. Because I don't think that they would ever be stupid enough not to realize how powerful the Federation is. It just doesn't make any sense to me, knowing how advanced they are and how much they knew about everything and the amount of spies that they had in the Federation. It just didn't make sense to me until I realized I think the border war was a stunt created by the Obsidian Order in order to get the Federation and the Cardassian Union into war, knowing that the Federation would give in at the end, that they would never really fully on attack the Cardassians. This is my theory. What do you guys think? If you like this content, please subscribe and tell your friends. If you're a fan of Star Trek, make a comment. It makes a difference. With that being said, thank you all for watching Trek Wars.